Hi, how you doing? Good to see you.
Do we have quorum? No.
Well, my clock just turned to 5 o'clock,
5
so
o'clock.
I'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Mesilla Valley MPO Bicycle and Pedestrian Facilities Advisory Committee to order. I guess we'll have a roll call for a quorum.
Yes. You gotta do a roll call quorum? Okay. Ashley Curry,
Present.
Andrew Bencomo,
Present.
Daniel Badarama,
Present.
Rod McGilvery, Jim Wilcox,
Present.
Jess Waller, Jack Kirby, and Harold Love,
Here.
and Mr. Chair.
Present.
And that's quorum.
We have approved the agenda. Any changes, deletions to the agenda? I'll hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Ashley Curry, so moved.
Harold
Andrew
Love second.
Bencomo, second.
I heard Mr. Love second it. All in favor of approving the agenda as presented, say aye. Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Next, we have election of officers. So we'll nominate the chair first. And I'll go ahead and open up the floor to nominations for the chair.
This is Ashley Curry, and I nominate George Pearson for chair.
Andrew Bencomo, I'll second that.
So hearing no other nominations, I do want to disclose that I am on some nonprofits that are in the same area of interest as the BPAC on the Velo Crucis and also New Mexico Bike Summit. So we can just do with only one nomination, we can do an aye and nay. So all in favor of approving George Pearson as chair, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Thank you for another year. We'll hear nominations for vice chair. I see them fighting over there, but since nobody else wants to say anything, I'll nominate Ashley Curry as vice chair.
Harold Love second.
Any other nominations? I'll close the nominations.
You have to have a second.
Mr. Love.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
So all in favor of Ashley Curry as vice chair, aye? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. And that's all the officers we need to elect.
Thank you.
So approval of the minutes. So on the minutes, I noticed on page 4, it begins that Dr. McAdams introduces Ms. Pervengi to give the presentation, except it's for a different presentation that's actually being given. So I think maybe a copy and paste happened wrong or something, or if you could look at that. I think Mr. Loya actually did the presentation there. Page 4. just before that agenda item on the traffic counts.
We can certainly correct that, Mr. Chair, with just an amendment, and we'll see exactly what needs to be there.
Okay. Any other comments on the minutes? Hearing none, I will hear a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Andrew Bencomo, so moved.
Daniel Valderrama, second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as amended. All in favor, aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Public comment. Now's an opportunity for public comment. Anybody from the public wish to comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to action items. We have a tip amendment.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Dominic Loyo to begin the presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the VPAC. All right, today we are looking at the Transportation Improvements Program. There is only one item up for amendment, and that will be LC 00290 for federal fiscal year 2023. It is an NMDOT-led project for the University Avenue multimodal project from NM 28 or Avenue de Mesilla to NM 478 or South Main Street. And is for multimodal roadway improvements. There's two items for it. One is a change of funding, so it's going from congestion mitigation air quality to carbon reduction program funds. And then the award will be increased from $900,000 to $3 million for a new project total of $21,127,263. And this project will positively affect PM1 safety targets and performance management 2 state of good repair. And I will now stand for any questions.
I guess my question probably be directed to Mr. Love is when will the shovels actually be dug into the ground to start this project? It's still a year away or something, isn't it?
That is correct. We're finishing our railroad coordination and coordination with the city.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, Andrew Bencomo off the record. So the increase is from 900,000 to $3 million. That's like triple, more than triple. What? And it says it's going to affect safety and state of good repair. How, do you have details of how it's going to do that? What was the increase for?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Bencomo, I believe this is part of the due to inflation, but I will let Mr. Love speak on that.
I believe that we saw an increase in the estimate, and so this is just changing the monies around to make sure we get the money needed to cover the increase in the estimate.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? I'll hear a motion to recommend approval of this to the policy board.
So move, Harold Love.
Ashley Curry, second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the tip amendment to the policy board. All in favor, aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes. We next have performance measures.
Mr. Chair, I will be presenting this as well, and the aforementioned performance measures 2, the state of good repair. The NMDOT has finally released their final numbers for them. So, 23 CFR 490 requires each MPO to set performance targets for the state of good repair. The last time this was done was in 2020. The state of good repair targets are a 4-year period to be updated this year. So there are 6 measures for the state of good repair. The first is percentages of bridges on the national highway system in good condition, the percentage of bridges on the national highway system in poor condition. As I said before, the 2023 targets have been released. The other 4 are to do with the roadway, both on the national highway system, interstate and non-interstate. So we have interstate pavements on the national highway system in good repair, interstate in poor condition, and then non-interstate pavements in good condition and non-interstate pavements in poor condition. So the percentage of bid, this year, NMDOT has elected to do statewide. In years past, they have done it by MPO area. This year, they decided it was just going to be statewide. So on the national highway system in good repair, in 2021, as you can see, we had 36.2% in good repair. In 2023, it's 30.8%. With a 2025 target of 23.9%. Then we have bridges in poor condition. The baseline, which was 2021, 2.4%. This year, 4.1%. And the 4-year target is less than 5.5%. So then we have pavement in good condition, which is 54%. This is on the interstate. And then we have 42.7% this year. And then the target is 37% in 2025. And then in poor condition, we have 1.7% in 2021. In 2023, it was up to 3.2% and only 3.8% in 2025. So this is anything that is not on the interstate, so such as Highway 70 in our area. So the baseline is 36.7% in good condition. This year would be 40.6%, and then in 4 years, 38.4%. And then we have poor condition, 2.6%. This year, 3.2%, and then less than 3.9% in 2025. So the purpose of the performance targets is to assess the state's national highway system in its ability to carry out the National Highway Performance Program. The 30-day comment period began on January 6th. The policy board will take final action on the February 8th meeting. Staff is requesting that BPAC recommend approval, and I'll now stand for any questions.
Mr. Chair, this is Jim Wilcox for the record. May I ask a question?
Go ahead.
What is the background behind the numbers basically getting worse over time?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Wilcox, especially with the bridges, they start off, when they're brand new, they start in good condition. It deteriorates over time. Usually when you see a large decline in good condition, it's just to fair condition, not to poor condition, and then it stays in fair for quite a while. And then hopefully it will be redone before it reaches poor condition. It's based on deck area and the support structure, if I recall right. And Mr. Love could go into more detail on that.
That is correct.
So who does the repairs for these bridges? Is it the feds or is it local? Who's in charge of that?
That would be an MDOT.
And so they're working on improving these situations. I can see why they degrade, but is there not enough repairs to keep up with the degradation?
I'll let Mr. Love answer that question.
Yes, it's the standard problem is there's not enough money to keep up with the repairs.
Okay, and I understand also the state has been getting a lot more money from oil revenues. Do we receive any money specifically targeted towards those repairs?
Yes, we do, and with the legislature just starting this week, we're watching very closely to see how much cut of the pie we're going to be able to get this year.
Okay, and my last question is, have you done an analysis to look at how much repair, a repair trajectory you need to catch up over time with the amount of repairs that will happen due to degradation?
Yes, and if you were to actually go to the legislature and watch all the different committees and stuff, you would be able to see all those projections that have been put together.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Andrew Bencomo for the record.
Go ahead.
I guess this question may go to Mr. Love also, but I'll ask you. So, looking at the state of good repair for roads compared to bridges, how, is there any formula, is there any priority given to bridges over roads? I'm assuming a poor road in poor condition is not, to me, is not as much of a danger as a bridge in poor condition. So how is that done? How, is there a priority, a bridge over roadway, or how does that work?
Typically, bridges and just based on what you said, bridges and roads are done separately and prioritized separately.
Okay, I guess I was wondering more, if there's a limited pool of money, how do you decide, you know, we really need to do more bridges than we do roads? Because if a bridge fails, that's way more catastrophic, I think, than, I mean, I don't know that that's ever happened in New Mexico. I'm thinking about Minnesota, places like that, where those bridges have failed. Sorry, I'm not talking to the microphone. So just curious about the lack of money and prioritization there.
The bridges are prioritized as far as degree of degradation, different than roadways are, based on what you just said, that a bridge going out has a tendency to be more problematic than a roadway going out. So based on that, you might see a number of roadway projects in the queue, and then only one bridge project. But that one bridge project, you know, is probably the top priority mixed in with all the roadway projects, if I'm making sense.
Okay, thank you.
So the missing piece there, there's a fair category that's whatever's left over between good and poor. Is that,
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
because looking at those numbers, that they're getting worse as time goes on, which clearly means that we're not spending enough money to keep our roads in some static condition. And I think that problem is going to get worse in the future, because as we're moving towards electronic vehicles, those vehicles are heavier because the batteries are heavier, so there's going to be more wear and tear on the road. So if that's the only change that happens, our roadways are going to get worse and worse. So that's something that we need to look at. I guess it's probably the state legislature or maybe the National Congress needs to look at that to make sure that our highways are funded properly. And I think the other comment is these numbers are only for statewide, so we don't know if we're doing better than other parts. I'm kind of assuming that our roads are a little bit better conditioned just because we have better weather conditions. On the other hand, I-10 is, I believe, the most heavily traveled route of, comparing I-10 and I-40, they're close, but I think I-10 probably has more traffic, more freight traffic. So that wears down the road more, but, and also as far as the bridges, are we doing better in some of the other parts of the states? I've seen the national map, and I think we're improving down here with bridge projects have happened. But there's no year. With all the numbers lumped into one pot, it's hard to tell how we're doing. Having those numbers separated by even state highway districts would be more useful, I think.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, this year, I do know that DOT was having staffing issues and things like that. So we believe that's part of the reason why we only got state numbers rather than in the past when we've gotten MPO-specific numbers as well as district-specific numbers.
Right, hopefully we can move back to that in the future.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a comment.
Okay.
Just a couple of things, just so that electric cars don't get to be bad rep. The actual, the most serious road degradation is caused by trucks. And there's figures out there at what point the weight of a vehicle starts to really impact the surface. So if anybody wants that information, that can be found online, and I'm sure I could find it. But it usually involves larger trucks. Also, just for the record, it's very difficult for planning groups to educate the public about the situation with repairing roads. So when roads go to full failure, they have to be completely torn up. In order to keep them from going to full failure, many times the authority will overlay or put some sort of oil on them before they show any real signs for a layperson of failure. And so what happens is the public oftentimes sees a road that looks to be perfectly fine being treated while another road is falling apart, and that's because there's not enough money to go through and do a complete underlayment repair. So an analogy that works pretty well is if your house needs to be repainted, it's better to repaint your house before the paint starts to crack. And so if you paint it before the underlying paint is starting to show that it's failing, you can keep painting over and over and over. Whereas once you let the paint crack, it peels off and you have to completely remove it and paint it again. So that's just for the record, so that if anybody is reading this, or if we have the media, that we know that it's been stated and clarified. Thank you.
Any other comments? So I'll hear a motion to recommend approval of the Performance Measure 2 State of Good Repair report to the Policy Board.
Jim Wilcox, I motion to approve.
Harold Love, second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend approval to the Policy Board. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes. On to 6.3, Performance Measure 3, Travel Time Reliability Presentation.
Just one second, Mr. Chair. I will be presenting this as well. So Performance Measure 3, System Performance, have also come up this year. These are once every 4 years. So again, CFR 23, CFR 490 requires the setting of these performance targets. The last time they were adopted was in 2018. This will be the second time that the system performance targets will be adopted. So there are actually quite a few of them. We only actually deal with 3 of them. So the congestion mitigation air quality final rule requires MPOs to establish performance targets for the following performance measures. One is system performance, which is percentage of the interstate reliability, person miles, and percentage of non-interstate reliable person miles, and then freight movement, truck travel time reliability index. So there are 3 more. We do not deal with these. The only MPO in the state that actually has to deal with these at this point is El Paso. So they are to assess a congestion mitigation air quality program. So it's annual hours of peak excess delay per capita, percentage of non-single occupancy vehicle travel, and on-road mobile source emissions reductions. As I said before, the Mississippi Valley MPO is not required to do any of these 3. So again, this is also statewide numbers. So we have the interstate reliability. Basically, the baseline was 98.5%. The target was 95.1%. Recommended target for 2023 is still 95.1%. And recommended for 2025 will maintain 95.1%. And then non-interstate, so it's at 97.5%, was the baseline score. The target was 90.4%. The actual target for this year was 94.1%, and that will maintain again at 94.1%. And then we have truck travel time reliability index. So the baseline was 1.23, the target was 1.15. And as you can see, did better. It's 1.3 for this year, and then 1.3 for 2025. So as I said before, the last time these were adopted was 2018. The 30-day public comment period has opened on these. It opened on January 6th. The policy board will be taking action on this item on February 8th. Staff is requesting that BPAC recommend approval, and I'll now stand for any comments or questions.
Okay, on the number, the percentage, when it says like 95%, does that mean that 95% of the time, if I got my car and went from destination A to destination B, that I can go the speed limit? Is that essentially what that means?
I will actually defer that question to Mr. Love.
Yes, basically.
Okay. So I'm kind of surprised that it's that high, including Albuquerque in the statewide numbers, but anyways, I'm just remembering back when in the days when I used to travel in Albuquerque and spend 2 hours if there was a crash on the interstate someplace to travel 15 minutes otherwise. And the truck performance numbers, what is that? It's a scale of what? What does that number mean?
I will let Mr. Lowe speak on that.
I'm not sure what the actual number means as far as truck reliability.
I guess that's something that I would,
That is something
Wonder about.
we can get back to you on. As I said, the report is in, but they're not, well, I'm not clear on exactly how the index works.
yeah, that's basically my question is how does it work? Is it 1 to 10 or is it 1 to, I don't know. I don't understand what the scale.
I can certainly look into it more and ask some of the engineers that work on it in freight exactly how it works and get back to you.
Right, if we just had a little key on the table maybe that explains somehow, is 1.3 good compared to Texas, for example, or whatever? Okay. Anybody else have questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Jim Wilcox for the record. You brought up something about being in a congestion situation. These measurements of targets for arrival, are they a 24-hour measurement? In other words, let's say that during peak hour, it's way below the 95%, but at 2 in the morning, 2 a.m., everybody's moving along just fine. How do they balance that? Is it weighted or is it number of cars?
There's a formula that they use that involves all of the above. Peak hour, non-peak hour, average daily, monthly, yearly, and all that's combined.
And then is it averaged?
Yeah, it's pretty much, yeah.
So is there also a peak hour figure that cities or counties or whoever's in charge are supposed to maintain or set as a goal for timely, commuting?
Yes, and that's a whole different analysis that's done, specifically for a specific section of highway, that has that struggles with congestion and their level of service drops from an A, B, all the way down to an F, which F is like basically traffic standing still,
All right.
on the roadway.
Now, do you recommend that do you think it's important for us to know that information or not?
It's always good to know where the numbers come from and what they mean. That's
So is that a
the
yes?
chairman was pointing out.
Are you saying yes, it would be good for us to know those numbers?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I'll hear a motion to recommend the report to the policy board.
So move, Harold Love.
Daniel Balderrama, second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend the performance measure 3 to the policy board. All in favor, aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that item passes. Discussion items, zero fare presentation.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mike Bartholomew from Roadrunner Transit will be giving that presentation.
Let's see, where's the? Okay, thank you. My name's Mike Bartholomew. I'm the transit administrator for City of Las Cruces Roadrunner Transit. And on November 28th, we implemented a zero fare program. So Andrew Ray had asked me to just kind of do a little presentation, you know, how we got there, what zero fare is. The zero fare trend is really growing in the United States right now. There's already a number of transit systems that are now entirely zero fare, or they have portions of their service that is zero fare. And there's a growing number that are exploring zero fare. Even very large transit systems like Washington, D.C. Metro is looking at zero fare. L.A. Metro is looking at zero fare. City of Albuquerque has been doing a zero fare demonstration project since January 1st of 2022, and they've extended that demonstration project to the end of June this year. And the city of Tucson, Arizona is also pretty much on a similar schedule of doing a demonstration project. So it's gaining a lot of traction, and I'll explain why in the next few slides. And like I said, we actually implemented it on November 28th using some fare-free days that we have for marketing, but council officially implemented it on the 5th of December through the end of June. And we're going to be going back to council in May for them to make a decision whether to extend it or not. And our anticipation is that the council probably will extend our zero fare. As part of doing this too, we did revised our passenger code of conduct because we wanted to make sure that there was clear rules to not only our staff but to our riders, to what we expect in terms of conduct and etiquette on the bus, in terms of baggage that they bring on the bus, how much is too much. Those kind of things were put on in our passenger code of conduct. So I refer to it as zero fare rather than fare free, mainly because really nothing is free in this world. It gets paid for some way or another. And it's kind of you look at zero fare as kind of like a public service, similar to, we don't charge people to check out books out of libraries. We don't charge people for their children to play on the playgrounds in our parks or us to recreate in the parks. We don't pay directly for road maintenance. It's all done through taxes. So zero fare for public transit is kind of along that same vein. But of course, there's a fare loss to it, so it has to be covered by other sources of local funding. Arguments that have been made for, this is kind of on the national level, arguments have been made for zero fare programs is it creates more disposable income for riders and they'll spend that income locally, and it generates more sales in the community, in the businesses. From an operating point of view, it eliminates fare disputes at the fare box for the buses. Provides transportation equity to those that need it most. And actually, I probably should have made that the first bullet because that's the biggest topic in transit right now is equity for those that really need the service. That even a dollar fare can be hard for a lot of people. It speeds up the boarding of the bus when you don't have to handle fares and manage bus passes. Helps keep the buses on schedule that way. In some communities where traffic congestion is a problem, it has the potential for reducing traffic congestion if it brings more people over to using public transit. Probably wouldn't see that necessarily in Las Cruces, but it's been an argument for. The cost of collecting money or taking the money for the fare and processing that money, there's a cost to doing that. So that would eliminate that cost of fare collection. And it can, zero fare, again, improves the overall quality of life in the community. Like I mentioned, having good libraries, having good streets, having good parks and everything, it contribute to the quality of life in a community. Arguments against zero fare that have been made nationally, of course, is the obvious is that there's a loss of revenue that has to somehow be replaced. If the plans of the transit service are to expand services, it makes it more difficult because now you have to find additional revenue to help cover some of those expansion plans. There's a perception, and I did I'd like to emphasize there's a perception of increased vandalism and vagrancy on buses that discourage people from using the service. We do see that homeless kind of make the buses shelters. So part of our bus conduct rules is how long you can stay on a bus. Like if a bus goes a full loop on our code of conduct, the passenger has to get off and get on another bus. They can't just be sitting on the same bus all day long. Communities that have a tax base that support their transit system, a dedicated tax base. If when they go out for public referendums, there have been arguments made that the general public is more favorable to those referendums for additional services for the transit if there's fares that are charged. And again, excuse me, there's a perception that the fares make it a safer environment on the bus. The current fare structure we used prior to going to zero fare was set by our city council in 2019. And then again, I said we had the zero fare that we started in November. We also did a zero fare for much of COVID, starting in March of 2020 through August of 2021. And the reason we don't look at that as a demonstration project is because we were running a reduced service, not the full level of service that we have now. And there was just not nearly as much available to people at the time during COVID. So we're trying to do this demonstration project when we're technically back to normal with our level of service to see how well we can sustain it. I have our base fares that we were charging were $1 a trip, and we had 31-day passes. We have reduced fares that are half fares for elderly, youth, those persons with disabilities. And then we have our dial-a-ride service that we charge a fare, and we're not allowed under the Americans with Disabilities Act to charge more than two times the base fare. So it was a $2 fare. So obviously, if we're having a zero fare, our dial-a-ride service has to be fare-free as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because that's where the real expense to us is in our zero fare project. In fiscal year 22, you can see our fixed route operating costs were over $4 million and fares only covered about 72%. And our dial-a-ride cost was over $2 million and our fares didn't even cover 2% of our operating costs on dial-a-ride. So the fares themselves aren't really a big factor in our operating costs. Our expenses, one of the things we want to look at too is our expenses are a lot higher now than they were pre-pandemic. There was a lot of significant wage increases for city employees in the last year, and our fuel costs have also gone up as well. This is where I want to talk a little bit about the other impacts of zero fare. We have plenty of capacity on our fixed route buses. We don't have to add right now. We're not anticipating of adding more buses because we're going to have two full buses. Our buses are going to get too full. We have the capacity on the buses. It's on our dial-a-ride side that where they schedule the rides, and it's basically a curb-to-curb or origin to destination type trip. That's where we're already a little bit at capacity or approaching capacity of our ability to meet the demand as it is right now. And going fare free on dial-a-ride is, we feel, is going to require ultimately more vehicles, more drivers to meet the demand. We are looking at software to make the rides scheduled a bit more efficiently, but still, if the demand grows a lot on dial-a-ride, we're going to need. We have to, under ADA, provide more vehicles and drivers under that service. As part of our short-range transit plan, we were also looking at implementing microtransit and integrating that into our dial-a-ride service. So microtransit is kind of like a public Uber, and we would use our dial-a-ride vehicles for that and actually probably mix dial-a-ride rides with microtransit rides. But again, because of the capacity issues on dial-a-ride, we're going to possibly delay implementing a microtransit service per se, although we're moving forward with looking at software that will accommodate that integration of dial-a-ride scheduling and microtransit scheduling. So throughout this project, we're going to have to be carefully watching the impacts of zero fare. We want to do surveys of our at least one survey of our riders midway through this demonstration project. We'll be monitoring particularly our dial ride service for how we had to do trip denials because of the inability to do a ride, and kind of monitoring that a bit closer. So the estimated additional cost in addition to the loss of fares, again, is primarily going to be on our dial ride side. So we feel that at least for the first year, and this is what we're asking for in our budget for fiscal year 24 in the city, is 2 more full-time drivers and to reclass 2 of our part-time drivers to full-time drivers on dial ride. And with benefits, that comes to over $162,000 for that. And then our fuel maintenance and operating supplies associated with additional service, close to over $250,000. And we would want to, for capital purchases, would need to get a couple more dial ride vehicles to continue with to really serve the service well. So you can see it's over $900,000 in the first year. That's where the real cost is to us in the zero fare program. And we feel that if the demand was growing faster than we're anticipating, that even in year 2, we may need to even expand that a bit more with more drivers and vehicles. So throughout this whole process, we'll be carefully monitoring it. Next steps, as I said, monitoring. We're going to be doing that a lot through this demonstration project, especially on dial ride. We're going to let the city manager kind of know the results of the impacts, especially on dial ride, any issues we've had in terms of behavioral issues on the bus, if there's been any increases in that. We'll have a report on that. We'll be giving the city manager the budgetary impacts that we project will be needed for zero fare if that's continued. And then we'll be going to council probably in May just to present the data to them and get their direction on whether they're going to continue it. Our current city council is very much pro the zero fare program, so I think they're going to look at every possibility of funding it and continuing it. So with that, I will take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you have any feel yet if ridership has increased with fare-free, zero fare?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question because I was looking at ridership so far this fiscal year, and prior to the zero fare at the end of November, we have been seeing growth. You know, it's the highest since the pandemic started by far, and I would say our July through November each month was about anywhere from 75–80% of pre-pandemic levels for the same month. But December, we were at 98% of pre-pandemic December levels of service. So really that, we're gonna look and see if that's a pattern, and perhaps that's a indication that we are seeing more ridership on our fixed route service.
Nothing scientific yet, but the indication is that it's successful.
So it seems to be doing pretty good. And in fact, when we went back to our full level of service at the end of April, that basically we started our service a little earlier on the weekdays, and then we added our evening weekday service that we had pre-pandemic. And in December, the evening ridership was actually up a little higher than it was in the December prior to the pandemic starting in terms of our evening ridership on our routes. So that's kind of encouraging that that's growing a little bit too.
So just your hours of operation, is it 6:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night?
10:30 at night weekdays, right? And Saturdays right now we're at 8:30 to 4:30 for our service. We did adjust the Saturday hours coming out of the pandemic just a little bit. We moved the whole service up an hour from what it used to be, mainly because we were getting a lot of requests for having this service start a little earlier for people to get to the farmer's market. So that was how we did it. And it's all a matter of how we distribute our staff, our driver time and everything. So we really don't have budgeted enough drivers to expand beyond those hours for Saturday. And part of our plans are to actually our shorter-term plans is we want to expand our weekend service. We've never had Sunday service. There's always been demands for Sunday service, and as far as Saturday service goes, Saturday could probably be the same level as a weekday service for really our ridership per hour, even though on Saturday, even though the Saturday hours are shorter, we have just as high a ridership on a Saturday as we do on any weekday average ridership. So probably would do well for a longer day of service on Saturday. But that's a big jump. That's while it doesn't require more vehicles, it requires a lot more drivers to extend those hours.
So when do you expect or hope for the microtransit trial to start?
If we don't anticipate it, we'll be working on getting the software for it, but we probably won't do it in fiscal year 24. It'd be nice if we can try for fiscal year 25 to get it going, but so we can kind of see how our funding is going to play out. City of Las Cruces does not have, while we get our federal funding that funds roughly a third of our operations, all of our local grant match funding comes from various city funds, from the general fund, from gas tax fund, from the hold harmless rebates that the city gets from the state is currently what we're getting those from. And there's not a particular formula that says, you know, X percentage of this goes to transit. Every budget year, the budget office and the city manager, you know, they're looking at the whole picture for the city, and they decide how much they can afford to switch over to move over to the transit fund to help with our match for our federal grants.
Okay, thank you. Any committee comments?
Mr. Chair, Andrew Bencomo for the record. I have a few questions. So as far as you talked about the passenger code of conduct, bringing things onto the bus, things like that, I understand that whole thing. And a lot of my questions are going to be based around, I like the words used there, perceptions of safety, perceptions of this. It's typically around unhoused people. Use the ridership, and that creates issues. So as far as the code of conduct, obviously unhoused people, everything they own stays with them all the time, and they don't want to leave it there because somebody else will take it. How did you come around to deciding what's too much and what's not enough, or what's not too much? How's that?
Well, we look at it both from a safety point of view, because we don't want items blocking the aisles from a safety point of view, and we want to make it, we don't want things flying around on the bus loose and unattended to. So basically, in terms of what people bring on the bus, is we used to have a limit of the number of bags people could bring on, but that was really hard to work with because of you know, a paper grocery bag is a little different than carrying 5 plastic grocery bags or something like that in your hands. So the basic rule is that what you have, you need to be able to bring on in one load. You need to be in control of it. You know, you can't just set it loose and unattended in some part of the bus. That's the other part of the rule. So, and it can't be blocking the aisles is the third part of the rule. So if we've had people bring kind of getting bigger and bigger suitcases, you know, they're putting their stuff in suitcases. As long as they can take that suitcase and set it, you know, get it out of the aisle on their lap or on the seat beside them on the bus, then that's okay. So that's basically the criteria that we use for that. We have had some concerns, like when people go to food banks and everything, and we've had some people say, well, you know, they give us so much, and you know, it's more than we can carry, and we have to do several loads on a bus, and that's unfortunate, but we just can't have all that. It's a safety issue when all those big boxes are blocking the aisle. We have a little more latitude for our dial-a-ride customers that go to food banks. There's a little bit more availability of space, but we still want to put it. We don't want to put a lot of burden on the drivers to be carrying lots of items on and off the bus.
Right, and I know there's no easy answers to this.
Right.
Judgment calls and things like that, and obviously if your drivers have to be doing that, it just negates the part of the no fare that makes things faster and keeps things on time, because you're loading people now. So there's no easy answers, I know that, so thank you for that. Also, So once again, the perception of, I'm envisioning somebody getting on the bus, bad weather, they keep riding the bus in loops, they don't want to get off because they don't want to be out in the bad weather. And they have to leave the bus because you have the rules to do that. So how does that happen if they refuse to leave the bus? Because again, you call the police, people hear about it, there's this report, and people are like, oh, the bus isn't safe because people are refusing to get off the bus, and the police have to be called. So I know, again, it's a balancing act, but what is your process for that?
Generally, that is, the driver would notify, if the customer wasn't cooperative, they would bring in a route supervisor to talk to the customer. And then if it got out of hand, then the police would be called after that. As far as, we had that discussion whether, if just even letting them hot buses, to stay on, but that kind of gets around it. I mean, if they really truly, if it's too cold or too hot, they'll be okay as long as they just get off that bus and move over to another bus at some point on their trip. They'll be okay. Really riding the bus, or what we would call loop riders, the only place that really becomes a problem is if they're taking up seats that causing other people to stand, or they're conducting illegal behavior on the bus, or their behavior is bothering other people on the bus. That's a separate issue that's part of our code of conduct policy, that we would ban people from the bus. And we generally have bans. We also have bans based on unhygienic like we've had people get on with soiled clothing, with urine and feces and things like that. And so in that case, they're not allowed to ride the bus until they can get cleaned up and not have that on the bus. So it's a little bit of a art, you have to work with the customer. It's not like we want to be really mean, but our idea is that we want to make everybody else that's riding the bus feel that this is a safe environment to be on the bus, and I'm not going to have to sit on the seat where somebody with soiled pants sat on the seat right before me or something like that. So
Okay. Well, I'm happy to hear that those possible scenarios have been discussed, because those are things that come up and could cause issues for the ridership. Next question is, if this zero fare is successful and ridership starts to increase, right now I don't ride the bus and take my bike and put it on a bike rack. George and Ashley may, they're way more bike riders than me. Is there thought about increasing the availability of bike racks, more bike racks on these buses if ridership reaches a specific point with zero fare?
yeah, right now on exterior bike racks, you're kind of limited at most to a 3-bike rack on there. Any bigger, then you got a lot of extension out in front of the bus. I've heard of some transit systems that they're more of like they're in a resort area, so they're taking bikes from a community up to mountain bike trails or something like that, that they'll actually tow have a trailer that people can put bikes on, but it's more of it's not quite like a fixed route service around the city. Yeah. It would be like going from the city maybe to a mountain resort or something like that. And some of those same systems, like in the winter, then they'll use those for people to put their ski equipment on or something to go up to the resorts. But we don't allow bikes on the bus, mainly because of the conflict with the passengers moving around inside the bus. We don't have a dedicated area that's really clear for the bikes to be put on our particular buses.
Okay. My next question was concerning the dial-a-ride. So is there, right now, the dial-a-ride buses I see going around town are they're not the full-size buses, but they're the pretty good-sized buses. Is there any plans to start to diversify sizes? And I mean, you talked about software that could schedule and things like that. So there may be a unit that can go somewhere where you don't need a paratransit type of transportation, and there would be a smaller unit to do that. I mean, I think of our transition at fire. We had engines running to medical calls all the time. Now they have squads, basically ambulances, and they have an ARV so that the ladder truck's not responding. The ARV, smaller units responding in place. It's more efficient. Are there plans to diversify that dial-a-ride fleet? Because they all seem like they're those larger units right now.
Yes, especially in terms of the microtransit, we'll probably be looking at diversifying with smaller minivan type vehicles for the microtransit part. As far as on dial-a-ride, the problem with the smaller vehicles, at least from my experience, is that I haven't seen a small, like a minivan, that really is an easy, it's easy to secure a wheelchair in. It's usually pretty cramped and tight and hard to reach around people to do it. Whereas in our other vehicles, you can have anywhere from 2 to 3 wheelchairs in the vehicle at one time. So it's even some people have a harder time getting into the back seats of a minivan if they're ambulatory, even, you know, for some of those folks. So there's a whole thing about making it convenient to get in and out of for people that have disabilities, whether they're in a wheelchair or ambulatory but have difficulties climbing stairs or.
Okay, I was just curious if maybe that software system could categorize the rides, since they are planned rides, could categorize it like,
Yes.
this route, we don't need paratransit, we don't need these, but of course, you're
Yeah.
right, getting to the back of a van is a little more difficult for,
The software would have the ability to allow us to diversify our fleet.
okay. And then also, just a suggestion, you may have already thought about it, probably have, I'm sure, some kind of PR campaign about this to educate people on the rules of riding and those type of things, since you did have the code of conduct rule change. People may look at that as, like I was saying, the perceptions, it's free now, all the homeless people are gonna be riding now, and so I don't wanna get on the bus, and so some kind of campaign to talk about the precautions that are taken, things that are done, the reason they're done this way, something like that. Is that out there in the plans?
Yeah, but unfortunately, right now, we don't really have much of a marketing budget to work with, but it's something that we'd like to do. We had a pretty weak marketing when we first put out the code of conduct, and we do make it available on our website. We have a QR code that people can scan and actually read the whole thing. It also talks about what they might be banned for, so people understand, you know, what behavior could result in a 30-day banning. Or it depends upon the nature of the behavior. We've had, you know, like if somebody had an assault, we'll usually have a police issue a no trespass, and those are good for 90 days. So that's usually how long we'll have a ban for a no trespass.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking a campaign more of it through the city's available resources, through the media department, and I can't remember what they're
Oh,
called.
yeah,
but
we'll take that.
Adrian and them make wonderful videos.
Yeah, so we'll take that recommendation to go and see what they can do for us.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike.
Mr. Chair, I have one quick question, if I may.
ahead.
Mr. Bartholomew, I should know this off the top of my head, but do the bus stops have the schedules written next to them? I mean, if you came to a bus stop, could you know where that bus is going and what time it would come?
No, we do have the ability to put some in where there's shelters. Unfortunately, we don't really have a good method to keep that current all the time and keep it looking good. But that's something that we want to move forward to. If even we again have some sort of a QR code or something that people can scan at each bus stop, because you could put something on a bus stop sign and they could scan it and then they could pull it up on their phone. Right now we don't have an app base, even though we have GPS on our buses, we don't have a phone app basis, right? You pretty much have to use a web browser to see where our buses are and when their anticipated time of arriving. So that's actually one of our goals with even this fiscal year with the software we're looking at, is to get a phone-based app for people to know real-time arrivals at particular stops for buses.
So how would people find out where the bus is going and how to get there if they just came up to a bus stop? Would they have to look it up on their phones ahead of time? Or how would they come across the information?
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
where
if they
the
haven't,
bus
if they
tables are.
don't, we still do printed bus schedules if they've had one of those. Those schedules are on our website. But I would say probably 90% of the folks call our phone number, call our customer service clerks and ask, how do I get from point A to point B? And our customer service clerks help them with that.
It seems to me like ridership would go up if there were opportunities to know where you're going. I mean, I think if I go to another city, yeah, I would look on it and go, okay, this one's going to get me from here to there, and that's how I would
Yeah,
navigate
and
that.
I think getting the trip scheduling software on a phone app is going to really help with that.
Great, thank you.
Because you still are on 30-minute headers for most routes, right?
Most of them are actually on our headways. Our Route 5 is on a 30-minute headway. Our Route 2 is, while each bus is on a 90-minute loop, there's 3 buses on our Route 2, so those are on a 30-minute headway. The other routes are 1-hour headways.
Yeah, so if you're on an hour headway route, you have to plan ahead for that.
Yeah.
Okay,
And we did, when I first came here, our routes were on 40 and 90-minute headways. Now, trying to explain that, what time a bus comes to our customers. So it was back in about 2008, we went to what we called clock-based headways that made things hours, on the hour, half hour, or 20 minutes in the case of some of the campus routes.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Bartholomew.
Thank you.
MPO Basics presentation.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Ms. Katarina Provinga to give the presentation.
Good evening. This is the MPO Basics presentation. So metropolitan planning organizations are federally mandated state-designated planning agencies. They are established in metropolitan areas that have at least a population of over 50,000 people, like us. In the state of New Mexico, we have a total of 5 MPOs. We have the El Paso MPO, the Farmington MPO, the Mesilla Valley MPO, the Mid-Region MPO, and the Santa Fe MPO. Whenever there's a metropolitan area that has over 200,000 people in their population, they become what's called a Transportation Management Area, or TMA. Fair warning, there are a lot of acronyms in this presentation. So small MPOs like ours are created by joint powers agreements. As we call them, JPAs. The JPAs specify how MPOs cooperate with the government and the role that they play in their designated area. For the larger additionally, JPAs, they also outline the financial responsibilities of each member of every MPO, of each MPO. For larger TMAs, federal law defines their structure and role in their designated areas. MPOs are required to have bylaws to govern their operations and procedures. I'm sure you remember from last year, bylaws are updated as needed with a new, or whenever there is a new JPA. As you remember from last year, our bylaws were updated last year, and it went into effect on January 1st of this year. So NMDOT establishes what's called a 3-year cooperative agreements with each MPO, and these agreements establish the terms of financial grants, of the financial grant to each MPO. So we generally interact with, all MPO staff across the state interact with their NMDOT liaison for most issues related to NMDOT and also with the FHWA. MPOs are responsible for producing work products. These are the products that we have. We have the Public Participation Plan, the PPP. It is updated every 5 years, along with the MTP, and I will go over all of these in a minute. The Title VI plan, which is updated every 3 years. The Unified Planning Work Program, or as we call the UPWP, is updated every 2 years. The Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, updated quarterly, and there is an open call for projects every 2 years. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or MTP, is updated every 5 years. The annual listing of obligated projects, it's updated every year. And then the annual performance and expenditure report, or as we call the APER, which is every year. The PPP is a 4-step process that addresses needs and challenges regarding transportation planning for all impacted and interested parties. The goal of the PPP essentially is to guide the MPO to have a transparent and predictable planning process that's accessible to all. The PPP is adopted or updated before the commencement of the MTP, or before the process. The PPP is updated every 5 years, as I said previously. The next update to the PPP will occur this year in 2023. Title VI plan. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 states that no person shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. This plan establishes that all MPOs comply with this and all related environmental justice regulations and directives. This plan also contains details for the process of complaints against any Title VI violations. This one is updated every 3 years. The next update will be next year in 2024. The Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP, is a biennial document that outlines transportation planning activities done by the MPO staff. This does include planning activities that we both oversee and don't oversee. The UPWP has to be consistent with the MTP. The MTP adopted, the Mesilla Valley MPO, we adopted a new UPWP last year in 2022. And the current one that was adopted last year went into effect on October 1st of 2022. The Transportation Improvement Program, also known as TIP, is just a list of federally funded and are regionally significant projects within an MPO area, specifically to our area or wherever their MPOs are designated. The call for projects does come out every 2 years. MPO staff will publish a TIP call for projects. We will do that later this month, and all of them do. Policy Board will be asked to approve of the new TIP this year in June 2023. And once it is approved, the new TIP will go into effect in October of this year. And the TIP is amended quarterly or as needed. And the TIP, what's covered is both future projects, both in the immediate future within 5 years and foreseeable future, 5+ years. For the near future, we have the University Avenue Multi-Model Project, Roadrunner Transit Maintenance and Operations Center, the Dripping Springs Roadway Implements, and the US 70 Rehabilitation, but it's their next phase. And then further along in the future, 5 years plus, we have the Arrowhead Interchange, the I-10 Bridge Replacement, Mesa Grande, and also the I-10 Rehabilitation Project. The MTP. The MTP is a continuous, long-range, comprehensive transportation plan that identifies goals, objectives, and policies that are covered within the next 20 years. It is updated every 5 years, and the MTP must be consistent with federal transportation law and has to also follow applicable sections of the law. The MTP also has to identify facilities that function as an integrated transportation network. It also has to emphasize those facilities that serve not just national, but also regional transportation needs. The MTP has to consider the 10 planning factors as they relate to the 20-year planning horizon, so plans that are in the next 20 years. The MTP also has to describe the performance measures and performance targets that are used in the MTP to assess the transportation system. The MTP has to, so it provides an evaluation system to analyze conditions and performance of transportation systems with respect to the performance targets. This is used to improve existing transportation facilities and the safety of people and goods. It consists of a financial plan on how projects can be funded, financial strategies, and how the MTP can be functionally implemented. As mentioned, the financial strategies are also applied to maintain current infrastructure along with creating future infrastructure. The MTP also examines implementation of environmental mitigation activities. The MTP also includes scenario planning. While this is not required by federal law, it is always strongly encouraged by both the FHWA and NMDOT. The MTP has FTA and transit planning for the future. And both the FHWA and NMDOT encourage all MPOs to address emergent issues as they come up. The currently adopted MTP that we have now for us is called the Mobility 2045. It was adopted by now the Policy Board, MPO Policy Board, on July 15th of 2020. And the next MTP that needs to be adopted by the Policy Board needs to be adopted by 2025, like I said, every 5 years. The process of starting this will begin this year. So for the BPAC, BPAC is responsible for providing transportation input from a bicycle and pedestrian viewpoint to the Policy Board. The BPAC provides a viewpoint on how regionally significant projects can affect the bicycle and pedestrian community to the Policy Board. The BPAC also provides community input to us, the Mesilla Valley MPO staff, and including the Policy Board. So in conclusion, the purpose of the MPO Basics book and this presentation is just to provide you all a quick reference on MPO-related documents, materials for members of all MPO committees, such as yourselves, and along with our staff. We are happy to provide updates to the MPO Basics book to our committee members, to you all as needed. And I will now stand for any comments and or questions.
Okay, I guess my questions go back to the long-range plan, the 5+ year. It had Mesa Grande on that. Has that always been there? Or
Wait, which one?
there, under future projects, 5 years plus? When was Mesa Grande?
Mr. Chair. As the resident travel demand modeler, that has been off and on. It was, we proposed it and the policy board about 3-4 years ago. And there was some discussion and it's pretty dormant. We still have it on the MTP for further study. It's not immediate, but it's definitely being still considered.
And the other corridor, I guess, the one that has been talked about from time to time. I think it's called the High Mesa Road Corridor or whatever.
Yes.
Essentially the Santa Teresa to Las Cruces Airport Road. Is that on, is that like 10-year out, 10-year plus or something, or is that on the list?
Mr. Chair, I can't exactly tell it's 10-year or 20-year. It's definitely still on the list. It's still to be discussed and studied more and probably modeled as well. So both are long range. They're not within the next 5 years. They could be, but I think it's more like 10 or 20 years before those be implemented.
And you said that the MTP process will start
Well, this year,
early this year, late this year?
probably middle of this year, I think.
Okay.
Just guessing.
Any committee member comments, questions?
I actually have one quick question, Mr. Chair. Ms. Fravingi and Dr. McAdams, is an MPO, the requirements that are on this MPO, are those requirements on the federal MPO level? So does every MPO have a BPAC, and does every MPO deliver these same deliverables?
We discussed that today, in fact. Not every MPO has a BPAC. We looked at Albuquerque. They have an active transportation committee that advise their TAC and their policy board. So this it's not required. It's recommended, but not required. So the MTP is required by federal regulations through FTA and also FHTA, and it has to be updated every 5 years. The real key is financial restraint, or, do you have the financial resource? That's something that added since I've been a planner too, so.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, Andrew Bencomo for the record. Could you go back to one of the very first slides, I don't know if it was the first or second, where it describes the MPOs and by size? It had the ones Albuquerque, Santa Fe, us.
Yes. You're talking about this
so
one with the
there's-
population, right? Sorry, yes.
Yeah, there's the transportation management area, which is a population of 200,000 or greater.
Correct.
The population of Doña Ana County is 221,508 as of 2021. So why do we not fall into that? Or is it just a matter of timing? When this next update is done, will we fall into that? My next question is what is the process to be recognized at that? And my third question, sorry to add so many, is if we are a transportation management area, does that bring more federal funding to our area for projects?
Well, our planned area doesn't include all of Doña Ana County, only a portion of it. Our boundary is at Fort Selden.
That is correct.
Okay, it goes, Fort Selden. Radium Springs area, Fort Selden, that's our northern boundary. And then our southern boundary stops just south of Burrino Road. And it's actually the intersection that is in front of Gadsden High School. That's our southernmost boundary point. And then when you cross that boundary, that goes into El Paso MPO. So within our planned area, we do not have 200,000 people. Yeah, our county has that, but within our planned area, we do not.
Okay, so based on my semi-limited knowledge of Doña Ana County, from Radium Springs north, there's very little population in Doña County up there. So it's the southern part. If El Paso is already taking that part of New Mexico from us, I don't want to say taking from us, but you know what I mean. That's not a competition, but kind of is. So if that area was included in Mesilla Valley MPO and our population was over 200,000, what would the transportation management area, would that give us, again, if that was part of our area and we were over to the 200,000, would that give us any more federal funding, clout, anything like that? I don't know if you know the answer to that or not.
I'm going to refer that question to Mr. Loya.
Dominic Loya for the record. Mr. Bencomo, Mr. Chair. So the way the funding is broken down, if you saw the call for projects we have, each specific area will get a certain amount of funding. 200,000 plus does get a little bit more funding. So we would see an increase in funding specifically, but it's also, there'd be more taking from that same pot. So 200,000 plus has a pot of money, 50,000 plus has a pot of money, less than 50,000 has a pot of money, less than 5,000 has a pot of money. And when they do calls for projects and things like that, each size category gets so much money. And it's the same way when they divide out funding across the state. So basically, our funding comes, Farmington gets part of ours, Santa Fe, we get it. And then, of course, there's the 2 TMAs. They're dividing that funding based on percentages, because being that New Mexico only provides a percentage to El Paso because of that. So Albuquerque basically sees most of those funds. Then we would, if we hit 200,000, we would basically be into that pot of money instead, and there'd be more funding for the 50,000.
Okay, so I guess I'm just wondering if there's benefits to being a TMA, why would we not pursue that if there's benefits to that?
So becoming a TMA is basically based on the census data. So every 10 years, they look at the metropolitan area, and we would, it's based on what's in our metropolitan area, and I believe Dr. McAdams can speak more on this.
Right, and I understand that. I understand that it's based on the population, but I guess my question is, why is El Paso, the El Paso MPO encompass part of New Mexico instead of us encompassing that and putting us, because even if you remove that population from El Paso, the city alone is close to 700,000 people. It's not going to affect their 200,000 numbers, but it will affect ours.
I was on the beginning with them as two, as far as I was in Bloor, Wisconsin, which was just declared when I became chairman an MPO. The start with declaring an MPO starts with the urbanized area. That means a city, usually a city core and fringes. They have a certain density level. That forms an urbanized area. So there's a Las Cruces urbanized area. So that becomes a start. Okay. The reason why we cannot incorporate with El Paso, because you look at what areas are associated with certain groups. There's a gap between our urbanized area and El Paso's urbanized area. So they would never be a merger in my lifetime, or maybe all. And the other thing is that area is growing, for good or for bad, it's growing very slowly. It's a steady growth. So probably we won't see a TMA within, say, 10 or 15, maybe 15 years. And so the nearest emerging MPO would be Roswell, but they're just under the 50,000. So the cutoff is 50,001, and we reach 200,001, you become a TNA. A TMA does you extra additional monies, but it also gives you ability to choose or direct your funds as well, so greater decision making. But as far as, because we're divided between El Paso MPO and also our Las Cruces with the Mesilla Valley MPO, and the other area is considered RTPO, our Rural Transportation Plan, where Hatch is and non-urbanized area. So unless at one point the areas merge together as far as their urbanized area, that would be a different situation. But I don't see that coming in the next 20 years.
I guess I'm just curious at what point that changeover happens, because the Mesilla Valley MPO and El Paso MPOs, I'm assuming, have been the way that they currently are forever. That's just the way they've always been. But in that forever timeline, things have changed. So how has that changed? How do we approach that to move towards that change and perhaps becoming?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Bencoma, this would occur generally at the census because they look at density, et cetera. So new urbanized areas will be declared, or urbanized areas will be expanded. We will probably, in the next year or two, look like revising our urbanized area boundaries, but right now it would be minor details. We want achieving more population, by expanding urbanized areas. So generally, it can occur according to new regulations after the census, there's a need for it, but that's another factor. The U.S. Census is now designated urban areas, and they're official. They'll be come out. The boundaries, they've already declared the urbanized area. The boundary will come out probably later this year, if not in February. I'm monitoring the census stuff too. And that's when you start to revise your boundaries. But there's different, the census does not designate urbanized areas anymore. They used to. The MPO will, in cooperation with the state, FHWA, FTA, will designate the urbanized areas. So the urbanized area, basically, our urbanized would be probably the same as our urban area, and we'll determine other things too. So the rules have changed to a certain degree, and the Census Department says, okay, FTA and FTA, you're going to be responsible for designating urbanized areas. So right now, we're waiting, I think, further word from DOT and FTA and FTA of how we should go about and do that. So you can look forward to that, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we have 5 MPOs. How many RTPOs are there in the state?
We do not have an exact number.
Okay, so to the west of us, I'm assuming that like Hatch and everything, Silver City is the center of an RTPO. And what about like the Alamogordo? Are they lumped in with that too, or is there another one off to the east someplace?
So the RTPOs are a state, basically, designation. So in most cases, you'll see them in like Hatch, Silver City, Alamogordo, depending on how the state has designated specifically for them.
Okay, I guess I'll offer some input to the next MTP then, that when you have to show the map that's statewide and you show the MPOs, also show the RTPOs. Just as a, because it was a learning, one of those light bulb moments to me that, oh, the entire state is covered by transportation planning. And that was after I had been on this committee for a few years. Anybody else have any comments? Move on to Open Meetings Act.
I will now present Mr. Dominic Loya.
Good evening again, Mr. Chair, members of the BPAC. So, as a yearly ritual, as Andrew likes to say, it is time for the Open Meetings Act review. Open Meetings Act is the sunshine law for the state of New Mexico. All public business must be conducted in view of the public. And the deliberation of the public body must be open to the public. Basically the requirements for Open Meetings Act. All quorum, any meeting with a quorum of members of any board, commission, administrative, or adjudicated body, or other policymaking body are declared public meetings open to the public unless the law specifically allows an exception. And things that would be an exception are for lawsuits, things like that. You'll see the city council of the city of Las Cruces saying they're going to have a closed meeting due to specific things, but that's all they can discuss in there for that. So open meetings are required when formulating public policy, developing personal rules, regulations, ordinances, discussion of public business, or taking any action within the authority of the board. So what is not required is actually public comment. That is up to the committee itself. As Mr. Reyes stated, he believes that public comment is good for all of our meetings, and the policy board does concur. So what does it require? Basically, it requires that any type of public policy to make recommendations, which this is a recommending body. So this body recommends to the policy board. They do have authority over financial and jurisdictional. They have jurisdictional and financial authority. So it prohibits members from conferring privately during meetings, sending texts, emails, any other things, passing notes. So anything like that, basically it must be done in view of the public. So any type of conversation up on the dais must be for public review. As said before, so the members of the public are permitted to record and videotape the proceedings. When we're here at the county, they are live streamed, so it is already being recorded. But if a member of the public comes in and wants to record it on their own, for their own purposes, they are allowed to do so because it is a public meeting. And again, as I said before, it does not require the public to be able to speak at the meeting. But as I said before, Mr. Ray also believes that the public should be able to voice their opinions on stuff at a meeting. So there are noticing requirements. This is why you will see that the agenda go out beforehand. Agendas must be a minimum of 72 hours before the meeting. We generally try to put them out about a week before the meeting so that everybody knows what will be on the meeting. It also gives us time, if needed, to amend an agenda. But basically, once we reach that 72-hour window, unless it is an emergency, and it would be an emergency meeting, those have very specific requirements to meet. In the Open Meetings Act, you cannot change an agenda once you hit that 72-hour window, because the public is supposed to know what is going to be discussed at the meeting. The other thing is only items on the posted agenda are permitted to be discussed during the meeting. If somebody brings something else up, that can be added to an agenda at a later date to be discussed at a meeting. Again, this also deals with the public coming in. They can ask questions, and it can be decided that if the questions aren't about the items, that would be discussed at a later meeting and be an agenda item for that so that they know when they can come back and see that. It does require meeting minutes. At a minimum, the minutes must include date, time, and meeting place, the names of the members in attendance, as well as the substance of the proposals considered, a record of any decisions and votes on those decisions. They are subject to public inspection, and they have to have a draft copy within 10 working days. So anytime we have a meeting within 10 days, we can give out a draft copy to the public if requested. So rolling quorums, and this is defined by the state of New Mexico, is a public, and they require to any meeting that is a public meeting is discussion of public business among a quorum of the body outside of the meeting, or any type of communication, even if you're not physically present. Phone calls are covered under this, text, emails. You cannot discuss something that is on an upcoming agenda with another member of the committee except within the confines of the meeting. So and this is the State Attorney General's example, if 3 members of a 5-member board discuss public business in a series of phone calls or emails, discussion of the meeting is a quorum, because in general, it's the majority of the board of the public body. They would have to have that discussion in front. They could not have that discussion basically behind closed doors. It needs to be in the public. And they are a violation because it's not publicly, not a properly public noticed meeting. So the BPAC is actually also considered under this for 3 reasons. As the Open Meetings Act, 1 is the policy board approves this every year. Therefore, the policy board sets precedent for all committees that report to it. 2, City of Las Cruces legal staff, which serves as legal staff for the Mesilla Valley MPO, has also gone on to say that they believe that the Open Meetings Act covers all boards throughout the city. And three, as earlier today, the public business is discussed in these meetings with the approval of things like the tip. So that is also covered under the Open Meetings Act, needs to be in public view. And this is the citing of the state legal. This is New Mexico State Exal Newsom versus Allred 1990 or 90 NM 790 was in 1977. The state Supreme Court basically upheld the Open Meetings Act. It was also supported by the Arizona State Supreme Court, and New Mexico State Supreme Court supported it in Gutierrez v. City of Albuquerque in 1981. So it was reaffirmed at that time. So the policy board did vote to approve the Open Meetings Compliance Act at their January 11th meeting, and I'll now stand for any comments or questions.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have a couple of questions.
So
Where are the
you on mic?
Mr. Chair, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Jim Wilcox for the record. Where are the revised, you said you have to have the minutes must be easily accessible or accessible by the public. Where are the revised minutes for these meetings kept?
So on the meeting calendar, if you go to the MPO website, after they are signed by the chair of the committee, the committee approves the minutes, they will be posted there. Before then, it has to be a direct request to staff, but we can't provide them after 10 days.
So I thought that, maybe I got this wrong, I thought the calendar had the minutes that were to be considered, previous minutes. Does that get revised on that date?
So the meeting calendar, actually, we only put them up after they are signed. So the minutes for, specifically for the last meeting, the November meeting, will now go up on the calendar for the November meeting. These minutes, if approved in February, will then go up on today's calendar meeting to show where we'll have the agenda, the packet, and the minutes.
Oh. So if, maybe I didn't look, so if today's meeting's on the calendar and I click on it, I won't find the unapproved minutes?
That is correct.
Okay, my mistake. I do want to bring something up because I have some difference of opinion about the Open Meetings Act as it applies to this committee. One of the things that was stated in the outline of what the task is of this committee is it's delegated to provide input to policy-making groups. And so from Section 10-15-1, Formation of Public Policy, it has some details here, and I'll just briefly read them. I guess the side of it that a little bit of a concern is that what happens when somebody is told they're on a committee, they can't speak to certain things related to the committee, that's restricting free speech. And so that's the other side of it, which I totally understand when somebody is elected as a public official, that they respond or they're answerable to the voters. We're appointed to this by those people who are responsible to the voters. So I see that as sort of a difference. I see that as a difference that butts up against the right to free speech. So that's the other side of it. And the only reason to bring up the free speech is I'd hate to see the governing bodies be put at a risk because they have limited free speech without authorization from, you know, the state or whatever. So I'll just briefly read a couple of things here from that 10-15-1 policy. The act specifically refers only to meetings of a quorum of the members of a public body. Meetings of a committee of a public body that is composed of less than a quorum of the members of or of non-members of the public body may not be subject to the provisions of the act if the committee engages solely in fact-finding, simply executes the policy decisions or final actions of the public body, and does not otherwise act as a policy-making body. So I guess the interpretation there would be whether we are a policy-making body. I see us as providing input, but we do not vote on public policy. In some situations, let me continue. In some situations, even a non-statutory committee appointed by a public body may constitute a policy body subject to the act if it makes any decisions on behalf of, formulates recommendations that are binding in any legal or practical way on, or otherwise establishes policy for the public body. And I don't see us as falling into any of those categories as establishing policy for the public body. And then finally, I consulted with the, excuse me a second here. I consulted with Shannon Kunkel, who is the executive director of the New Mexico Foundation for Open Government. Their job is to make sure that there is open government. And as she says, as I mentioned during our call, the State Open Meetings Act applies to policy and decision-making bodies, but not explicitly to advisory committees and boards. So that's, I'm just bringing this as public information because I'm concerned about the restriction of free speech and how that restriction, if it's not wholly authorized, could cause a legal liability by the government bodies should somebody claim that their right to free speech was impinged.
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Wilcox, if you wouldn't mind, you can please forward that on to Mr. Andrew Ray.
I will. I'm going to give it to you. I have it right now. You can have
All righty,
these
thank you.
documents.
There are a few things. Basically, the restriction only is between members of the committee. You can speak with anybody outside the committee about that. It is basically members of the committee that you cannot speak to until that meeting. So,
Sure. I understand that the restriction on free speech is between members. I understand that.
okay.
And it's more specific in that it's pertains to any agenda items. So you're talking about after the agenda is published, we can't talk amongst ourselves is, what do you think about that tip amendment? We can't do that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in terms of, let's say that a couple of committee members of this committee happen to be part of another board, and they wanted to bring up, to find from that board what that board thinks about an upcoming agenda item. So those two members, or three, start a discussion and saying, this is what's coming up on the agenda, and they start to discuss amongst themselves that item. From what I'm hearing from what you presented, that would be a rolling quorum, it would be prohibited. On the other hand, what I'm concerned about is if they were muzzled and not able to speak during that board meeting, they might see that as an infringement on their free speech, and they could possibly contest that, and I would hate to see a governing body in any legal liability for having limited free speech unless it's wholly authorized.
But it's probably not an issue unless it's actually on the agenda. So if we as the separate board
Right.
at our nonprofit say, you know, we really need to talk about road safety on University Avenue. How do we bring that forward? And so we come up with ideas and say, well, we need to ask Mr. Ray to put that on our agenda.
I think that's
And so once it's on the agenda, then we're done talking about it until it comes before here and the presentation's made. Is that a reasonable scenario?
That is a reasonable scenario. Basically, as long as it's not on the agenda, you can discuss it even beforehand. Once it becomes on the agenda, then basically for that period of basically what ends up a week, usually from when we post agendas, you cannot speak on it until with members of the board, members of the committee, until that meeting, and then all those conversations have to happen in public.
Yeah, and I see the attempt to say it's a short period of time and it's on the agenda. It's still possibly a restriction on free speech, no matter whether it's on the agenda and how long it is. I cannot make that decision. I'm not a legal authority. I'm just bringing it up as a concern.
I can see where your concern is, and we can certainly take it to our legal representation and see what their interpretation of it is.
I appreciate that.
Do we have anybody else with comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to committee and staff comments. City of Las Cruces.
Yes, Mr. Chair. City of Las Cruces only update is the Walnut and Madrid project. That's currently under construction. They got the utility lines working first, and then they'll move on to payment and all the other infrastructure. Estimated completion date is September of this year. And that is it.
Okay, yeah, I was looking for metal pipes there because of the requirement, but I spoke with somebody, one of the workers there, and apparently that metal portion requirement was just for some connectors or something that was a very small part of the project, but still it delayed us, what, 3 months or more?
Yeah, a little bit more. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Doña Ana County is absent, Town of Mesilla is absent, NMSU is absent, Las Cruces Public Schools. Do we have something?
We have no updates. Thank you.
NMDOT.
Harold Love, NMDOT, just have one update. Stern Drive from mile marker 5 to 6 in Las Cruces. Department of Transportation will have lane closures and shoulder work in place for erosion control measures. Flagging operation will also be in place. Motorists are asked to reduce speed, obey posted signs, and be cautious of personnel and equipment in the area. That's all I have.
So where about is that? I know where Stern is, like the frontage road, but. What did you say the mile marker was?
5 to 6. So I'm thinking that's probably getting close to Barino, maybe.
Yeah, so that's gonna be way south, that's almost, okay. And my question on the I-25 capacity study, do you have any information on public meetings?
There will be a public meeting in February.
Okay, so maybe make sure that the MPO staff knows about that so they can disperse that, or
Sure.
your public,
As soon as we get an exact date and location, that will be distributed.
okay. MPO staff update.
Dominic Loya for MPO staff. So we do have a couple of updates. We do have an ongoing call for projects right now. It will close on January 27th. That is for recreational trails, transportation alternatives, and then the new carbon reduction program. We also have the MTP right now. The 2 is open for comment for the 2 amendments to it, which are for performance measures 2 and performance measures 3. And the tip will be open also for public comment for the next 3 weeks as well, before it goes before the policy board. So those are the only updates we have.
So our comments today, those get folded into that public input, is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Jack.
Okay. I guess we can go, I can either ask you during staff update, or I can start off the committee comments. We have an open position, right, on this board? Is that?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. From my understanding, there is a candidate, and it will be discussed at the next policy board meeting. There's at least one candidate.
Okay.
They will be discussed at the next policy board meeting for, of course, policy board to appoint to this committee.
Right, okay. So I had been thinking about that, and I hadn't seen it on the previous policy board meeting. Part of the new bylaws takes track of attendance. Will that be something, are you gonna add that to the sign-in sheet or somehow let us know how attendance is going, because we've got some empty seats today.
Staff does track attendance. At any time you can request it. We just do it after the meetings. Usually we have an Excel sheet that we just keep track of attendance. Of course, any vacant seats don't have attendance. So that's basically just, it doesn't count till the person begins for that specifically. As for other members, yes, there will be absences basically. And as you know, it's 3 absences per year, as well as 3 proxy provisions.
Right. Okay, and I was at the MPO board meeting, and Mayor Barraza's had some comments about bicyclists in Mesilla, essentially bad behavior of bicyclists. And of course, the only bicyclists that get noticed are the ones that are doing bad behavior. There's some mention that there might be, Mr. Ray might speak with her some more on that. And then it might come back to us maybe as a potential thing, or has there been any progress on that or change on that?
So there's not, to my knowledge, there's been any change on it. It is proposed as a future agenda item. I believe Mr. Ray is in discussions with Mayor Barraza, but as I said, I'm not sure exactly where those discussions have gone at this point.
Yeah, because it's of very much interest to this committee, and that would also relate to other issues in the whole MPO area as far as education and proper bicyclist behavior, enforcement, equity, all the E's. Any other committee member comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Jim Wilcox for the record. I wanted to note that a 16-year-old boy was killed in a crash on December 9th, and I would like to ask you to call for a moment of silence.
Okay.
It was a pedestrian death.
Oh, that's the one across from Morgan Mountain
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
High School. Okay, we'll have a moment of silence in memory of that tragedy. Any other comments?
Chair, Andrew Bencomo for the record. I would like to request, so the presentations that were done earlier were done by MPO staff. But a lot of the questions that we asked couldn't be answered. A lot of the information they didn't have, and I'm not bashing MPO staff at all, I'm not saying that. I would like to request that whatever organization is doing the presentation, perhaps somebody from that organization could do the presentation, or somebody that has answers to questions could be there for that, a la Mike Bartholomew. Every question we asked, he could answer because he was giving the presentation, he was here. Basically, we're kind of putting MPO staff at a huge disadvantage because we're peppering him with a lot of questions. He's like, I don't know. So if we could, unless something major happens and they can't make it or whatever, could we get somebody from that organization to do the presentation? That'd be wonderful if we could do that. Second item was there was a pedestrian safety work session the city council was going to do. It got put off, and I've been told that it's going to happen February 13th. So hopefully we can get people there. Obviously, the public comment, they don't have to allow that at work sessions, but at least be there to listen to what's happening if the public can be there to listen, and then perhaps afterwards talk to their counselors after the meeting. And then the third one was I got notice, I think it's, you would probably know, George, April something, Tour of Optimism. April 11th?
23rd, I think.
23rd? 23rd? So sometime in April, it was announced as
Sunday in April.
Yeah, to be announced and more details given later. But the Tour of Optimism is
It is April 23rd.
April 23rd. Thank you. A fundraiser for the Optimist Club, but it's a large bicycle ride around the county. It's fun, great to do. Hopefully we get a lot of people out there. So I just wanted to announce that. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Move on to public comment. See no public, we'll move on to adjournment. Your motion to adjourn?
Ashley Curry, so moved.
Andrew Bencomo, second.
Without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.